You've landed on The Substance. I'm your host, Philip Marinello, joined by nobody here. This is first solo episode in the 3.0 era here. I'm excited to share a conversation with you here on the show today. We've got Olivia Meade, returning guest, with her pastor, Will Basham, and co-editor and author, Jason Cook. Olivia was here previously with her book, Ordinary Faithfulness. We had a great time talking with her. That was part of the Rural Church Voices line of books. And this is their first. You should call it an anthology. So Will, Olivia, and Jason are the editors. They each wrote one chapter. There's 12 chapters, different folks from different rural churches, different states, different areas. We even got one here in Missouri, real close to St. Louis there. But yeah, we've got a really good conversation. Talked a little bit about the book, talked about their passion for the rural church, which is not something that you hear come up a lot. I was very excited to hear people just with a different lived experience than I have, but people who are working faithfully and trying to encourage others there too. So excited to share this with you, and I hope you enjoy. Today we've got Jason Cook, Olivia Meade, and Will Basham.
That's right.
Beautiful. Welcome to The Substance, guys, of Rural Church Voices.
Thanks for having us.
Glad to be
Welcome back, Olivia.
Yes.
Olivia is a great marketer once again. I don't know how you guys get on other people's radar, but when I got the package and I saw it had Rural Church Voices, I was like, it's kind of small. I wonder. And then I opened it up and it had a cigar in it, and I was like, all right, I'm emailing Olivia today. It's a nice little hook there.
Yeah, props to Will. He picked that cigar out this time. So
very nice. No, I was gonna smoke it this past weekend, but just busy prepping, family in town, so I'm gonna be enjoying that very soon here. So do you guys all do cigars together semi-regularly?
We try to.
So I'm probably the chief cigar smoker of the group.
Nice.
I bet I smoke a lot more than Jason and Olivia do.
I agree with
but
that.
They do enjoy with us occasionally.
There you go.
Yeah, we just did the other day together for the first time in a year. So maybe next year we'll smoke again together.
About every time we release a
Once
book,
a year.
we smoke a cigar together.
Yeah.
I try not to push it too much.
So we try to be friends outside the book too. It's hit or miss, but we're pretty good friends.
There you go. So let's do some brief intros here. Audiences may know Olivia for a previous appearance here on The Substance, but Jason, why don't you tell the folks just a little bit about yourself, how you came to the church, how you connected with these folks. Have you known all each other like for a real long time, or is it some more recent trio of relationships here?
So thanks for having me, Philip. We've known each other for a few years. I've known Will a little bit longer than Olivia. We've all kind of traveled in the same circles and been in the same area, but not necessarily had our paths cross. So I've been at New Heights about 5 years, and my background before New Heights, which is kind of what put me in a position to be involved with the Rural Church Voices project, was I grew up, was raised up, and was involved in rural ministry with a United Baptist denomination that's here in southern West Virginia, and spent a long time in rural ministry in old time religion, which was obviously the inspiration for my book. And so through a part of that, I was in Lincoln County, moved there to be a part of a church and be a part of a ministry, which is where Will and Olivia are from. So that's kind of how the connection started. I left that denomination and came to New Heights about 5 years ago, where I've been a member. So we've all gotten to know each other since.
Nice. So, Will, you're a pastor there. How long have you been a part of that assembly?
Yeah. So I planted New Heights Church, the church that I lead, in 2012. So a little over 10 years now.
Wow.
Pastoring that church, and serve with a plurality of pastors there, and God's blessed our congregation. It's been fun, and hoping to do it for a lot longer into the future. But yeah, Jason and Olivia are both members of our church, and so it's a joy that we can actually just write and do ministry that kind of goes out broadly beyond our church, but also just be friends and family in the same local church as well.
So you said church plant. Was that just something you had on your heart? Did you kind of come? Were you sent by another group of churches or a body, or was there just kind of a need you saw? How did that kind of start?
I grew up in a rural county in West Virginia that Jason was mentioning, and I thought church plant was just the fake plants at the front of the sanctuary. I didn't know. I'd never heard of church planting. I never heard of really anyone starting a new congregation in the past 100 years. And I ended up going to seminary, and when I was in seminary, I heard about church planting. I had a couple of people suggest church planting to me because I was a youth minister and God was working and we were seeing conversions and stuff. And so I ended up taking a church planting class in seminary and just fell in love with the concept. Thought it was biblical, thought it was helpful, and then just pragmatically, I thought it made a lot of sense for me. And because I couldn't see myself rolling in and doing the whole suit and tie, established church pastor thing. And so I was like, well, let's look around and pray about where God might lead us to plant a church. I didn't want to plant in my hometown because I knew too many people in too many churches and didn't want to split all those up and cause drama. And so I ended up moving to the town I live in now, Milton, West Virginia, which is a town of a little less than 3,000 people, which felt like the big city to me from where I was coming from. And so I moved to a bigger town and planted a church, which I found out is actually in a small town. And I moved there and planted there because it was very similar to the culture I grew up in and knew and was familiar with.
So 3,000 is big. Where'd you grow up? What was that town like?
Under 1,000.
Woo.
Yeah,
So
there were 30 people
rural.
in my graduating class. Yeah.
How many?
30 in my graduating class from high school. So yeah,
I went to a private Christian school. I was in a much bigger area, but that's about my size at a little private Christian.
Yeah.
Wow, we under 1,000 people. So that's like super pros and cons, but like you're really, everybody truly knows everybody.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And to show the connections even more, one of my best friends through high school that I graduated with is Olivia's husband. And so it's a small world. So that's kind of brings it full circle how we're all connected.
So you and Matt have known each other like your whole lives?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we met in elementary school.
So did you guys reconnect? So when did you and Olivia meet?
I think we met when I was still in high school and you were a youth pastor in town, which you were only like a few years older than all of us who were like.
Thank you for clarifying. You're making me sound super ancient for a little bit.
I was in high school and you were the old youth pastor for some reason.
But no, I think that's the first time we met. And then when Matt and I started dating, he was already part of the church, which was not technically a church yet. It was just like 5 people meeting in a Giovanni's pizza restaurant.
So you met your husband high school, college?
Yeah, I was in college, and he had already graduated college. So yeah.
So Jason, do you have any familial relationship to any of these other two here?
Not that we know of. It's always possible, though. You never know.
I've read a few articles. I've read a few articles about that recently, like in some of those small towns where you find, like, I feel like that's got to be a bit of a risk, I guess, with the limited pool of people there.
It can be, yes.
So Olivia's husband, Matt, was actually the first baptism in our church. So, so he came to faith and we baptized him. And like Liv said, we were just a handful of people doing a Bible study at a pizza restaurant.
And then you went to seminary, kind of had the vision and started, or was that post?
So I'd been to seminary before we were doing that pizza restaurant thing. Yeah. So
that was like stage 1.
Yeah. Right.
Pizza restaurant.
So
just like they teach you, right?
Yeah, we did the pizza restaurant right. Like I was as soon as I graduated, we started doing church planting ministry.
So I think Olivia told us a little bit about it previously, but what were the seeds of Rural Church Voices? I know that you guys both wrote your own books, and then this is a joint book with you and several other people. But starting with the three, I know she had Ordinary Faithfulness, and you two had yours. What were the beginnings of that?
Yeah, so I would say the beginnings of it were during COVID. I had a lot of free time on my hands. So I've been working just with, processing and thinking through kind of the ministry transitions that I've been through, and kind of beginning to have an awareness of the church culture that I was raised up in. And sitting at home, I decided to email Will, and I just kind of pitched it to him. I said, "Hey, Will, I've been thinking about writing a book, and here's what I've got." And but when he did get back to me, he was pretty much like, "Hey, I've been working on the same thing." And so we actually discussed a few different options, maybe writing a book together. And the project kind of evolved into, we decided to release our books, Rural Mission for Will, Old Time Religion for me, together. And we worked on that throughout 2020 and released them in early 2021. And so from that, as we were looking at the scope of the project, we thought that there could be something more than just the two of us releasing books. And we initially, so Will and Olivia have known each other quite a while, as you just heard. But I think I first met Olivia about 2 years ago when she came into the project to kind of consult with us on the business aspect, the marketing aspect, and just to kind of give content advice with all of her experience and knowledge. And as the three of us began to talk, we kind of realized that we had something bigger. So the full Rural Church Voices project was born. And then, Olivia obviously wrote and released Ordinary Faithfulness. And then we moved on to Church Out Here.
So it went Jason's book, Will's book, Olivia's book?
Yes. Will and I released our books together at the same date.
So that was a joint launch. And I did see a lot of people posting those your Jason's book and Will's book together. So joint launch, that makes sense. So you were a part of the team at that time, Olivia?
Yes, at that time. So in the initial phase of their content planning and writing, I was not involved. So they called me and was like, "Hey, we have these books that we've written. So I think that you guys had totally finished at least the writing portion. And now we need some help and advice on how to get it out there." And so I have a background in marketing, and then I also work in content and writing now professionally. So I feel like I was able to add a little bit. At least they gave me a free lunch I got free lunch out of the initial meeting. So I was like, yeah, sure, I'll come. Give me a Subway sub. But from that, of course, knowing Will, and then getting to know Jason, I loved the concept of their books. I got to read them early and really loved what they were saying, and thought that their perspectives were really great from a pastoral perspective, but also just like a small town practitioner, someone sharing the gospel. And so I continued to be involved in helping them launch their books. And then after their books launched, they both approached me and asked, "Hey, do you think you have a book in you as well?" So it was never really the initial plan, but after the involvement and kind of help with them, it was clear that, hey, I think that there's more to be said in this series, and I think my voice was the right one to come next.
Well, I've read several of the things here, but being the only full one I read, I imagine that was great. So do you have a history? You said you write content. Have you written a book length project previously, or was that your first one?
No, that was the first one. So really before writing Ordinary Faithfulness, writing for me was more of a hobby. It's something that I did for our church, or for like our women's Bible study or different projects like that. It was never a career for me. And certainly, never a full length project like that. And so to take that on, especially with two young kids at home, coming out of COVID, I was transitioning jobs. There was a lot happening for me at the time of writing this book, but I'm kind of grateful that it happened in that way as well. For one, because Jason and Will were supporting me and kind of helping me and guiding me. And we joked and said that they were my publishers. And so we're, they're keeping me on deadline. And so that was helpful. But yeah, so coming out of this book, I actually started writing a lot more for just content creation. So I work for Acts 29 as a writer, and I do a lot of content for them, and then in other spaces as well, including our church. And so this project really helped kind of launch me, not from I don't mean launch like in a platform perspective, but it helped me really gain more confidence in writing, and see that, a long form project like this is doable. So I'm really grateful for that. And then, coming into writing for church out here and helping other authors who, we have 12 authors, including the three of us, for this book. And so we were able to help coach these other authors who have either maybe never written before, or at least not in this capacity. Or even if they were seasoned writers, we were able to kind of give a little bit of context and just help for what this project needed. So that was kind of a fun experience as well for this. From our perspective, I guess Jason and Will would probably say the same, because, with this book, we didn't write the entire book ourselves, but we were able to be involved in every piece, of every chapter. So that's
got to be nice, right? Cool, you get to produce a full book and only have to write like a 1/12 of the content.
Well, here's what I learned. It's a lot easier to write a book than edit a whole one.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it's true.
Oh, God.
Yeah, because
you're coordinating with like 9 other people
just,
or 11 other people.
The coordination of it all. And we wanted the whole book to be cohesive and really fit stylistically together and flow really well for the reader, that it wasn't so kind of chompy from one chapter to the next. And
sure.
So through like revisions and even just stylistic things and grammar, and Olivia brought in these books that were huge that told us like the rules of editing that I didn't know existed, and she read like a whole book on semicolons, and God bless her for that.
It's a really good book. It's a good book.
Okay. Hey, we got the shout out segment at the end here. Before I do want to talk about some of the editing process and hear your guys' experience of that, but I did want to ask before we get there. So it says independently published by Rural Church Voices on the dust jacket. What does that look like practically? Like, obviously, you're probably not printing out like tens of thousands of copies necessarily right out of the gate, but like independently published, this is like a nice book. You have a logo. Like, how does the publishing aspect of it work? I mean, it's one thing to put out like pamphlets locally or host writing online, but starting up Rural Church Voices publishing, whatever that looks like. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so we publish using the Amazon KDP platform. So there's a back-end technical work on that as far as preparing. I may speak to the technical part, and then I will very much defer to my colleagues for the editing and the content part, because that's where they help me along. So on the back end
physically creating a book is plenty of work.
It is, yes.
Like once you write it, getting it into like a package is a whole nother thing.
Yeah, the platform is, there's a lot of upfront learning, but so basically you have to work your manuscript into a format and then set up the details of the book. And we work with an awesome graphic designer, Aubrey Meadows. I'll give her a shout out on the podcast. She's done the cover and kind of the theme for all of our books. And so after you do kind of formatting the manuscript and the content design, you work within the publishing system to kind of figure out some of the details of the book. And it's a lot of upfront work, but kind of once you get it set up, then you kind of focus more on the content and the editing piece, which is where I was so generously helped along by my fellow editors.
So Jason, so when you're doing that, do you do like, is it print on demand, or did you do an initial run and there's a warehouse of books somewhere? How does that work?
Yeah, so the warehouse is not as big as some people might imagine it to be. It's a nice little office at the church, but maybe we'll get a warehouse space one day. I don't know. So what we did was we learned a lot of lessons as Will and I were publishing our books as far as promotion.
Yeah, this is the fourth one, right? So you guys kind of have a little bit of an idea of what a rollout looks like?
Yes, but to answer your question directly, we did a pre-ordering process, and we ordered an initial run of books, and then as the book matures and the project kind of moves forward, we do more of a print on demand, and as the books are sold on Amazon or continue to be sold their way.
Nice. So is that just you guys, the three of you, or spouses and friends? Just like when you're getting low, you kind of have to decide, okay, what's the next print run going to be, kind of deal.
Yeah, the it's very familial. My daughter is our main shipping department, so my oldest my oldest daughter packages and ships the books for us. She's 14, so we employ child labor, and we buy her Starbucks gift cards sometimes to thank her for that. But yeah, it is very it's very much us just slinging books out of the back of our trucks and shipping them from our local post office.
Nice. 12 authors. I didn't get to read the whole thing. Looked like some people were from Georgia. One I saw was from Missouri. Like, is Rural Church Voices a network? Do you guys just have relationships? Like, how did you guys choose, like, what talent was tapped? Who wrote what? Like, how did that process kind of go?
I would just jump in and say, like, we knew everyone. There was a connection somewhere. So it wasn't us, like, finding talent and recruiting it. It was because it's hard to find, right, when you're dealing with rural authors. But
it is on any project, but I'm sure even more so if you're trying
but I think technology. I think what was most helpful was we figured out what we wanted to write about first. So we said, okay, what do rural churches need to hear about, and what would be helpful that maybe necessarily hasn't been written about yet. Olivia, I know you were going to jump in and speak to that process a little bit.
Yeah, I was just going to say, our initial first step was to decide what the content was. And so we didn't just contact people and say, hey, what do you want to write about? It was important to us to make sure this project was cohesive, but that it told an entire story. So we have 12 people, 12 different writing styles. We've edited it and guided it to be a cohesive book that hopefully, when you read it together, it makes sense as you go from chapter to chapter. But it was important to us to ensure that it flowed in a way that made sense for anyone who was picking up the book. So whether you're a pastor, whether you lead in ministry, whether you're just, a regular churchgoer, which all of us are, in a lot of ways too. I think it was important for us to decide, what do we want to say? And then we can bring people in to speak to those particular things. So
the work of editing and shaping it is really helpful. I was like, well, right away, I do need to read the first chapter. I really appreciated Christian's and Christian Crouch. I don't know if I could find them online.
Man, isn't he a great writer though? He's a phenomenal writer.
He is.
I don't know. Is he a West Virginian or is he one of the guys from somewhere else?
So he's from Georgia.
Okay, I knew there was a Georgian. It's like I definitely read chapter 1. So
yeah, he passes
either
a church,
Georgia or Missouri.
Yeah, he pastors a church in Georgia. The connection of how we kind of found him was members of our church used to be members at his church, and when we released the first books, those members were like, "Hey, you need to send him a copy. Let him check this out." He engaged with the work and expressed interest. He wrote a couple articles for our website, and we just saw his writing was captivating and good, and his experience was a good asset to the story we were trying to tell. And so there was a lot of that, even with the other authors, either some history or a lot of engagement as the project of our 3 books got rolling. We're not a network. There's no formal affiliation with the 12 authors, other than that we all had the same heartbeat to write this book for small town church leaders. And so we've we're actually a representation of several different denominations and networks, just with the same goal of giving some advice to people in a similar context.
I like that a lot. That's got to be exciting.
Yeah.
Challenging, I'm sure, to wrangle that all as an editor, but that's got to be very exciting.
Yeah. It was cool to hear everyone's kind of backstories, and we did some Zoom calls and tried to get everybody on the same page, just with writing style and what the goal of the project was, what each topic was going to be that we asked people to write on, and then jumped into it.
We've mentioned this several times on the show before with several different authors with different size platforms, but everybody has been very unanimous. You don't write books to get rich or to sell 1 million copies. And like most people, that's not why they write books. And if the goal is to truly edify, like capital C, like the church, like largely having different people from different areas, different denominations, different giftedness, that's got to be kind of like an exciting project to do, especially after like 3 individual, very clear ones. You guys are all kind of from the same pool. Expanding that, what were some of the benefits that surprised you guys when you're doing that?
I think one big benefit is just encouragement of like seeing the practicality of getting a resource in someone's hands and them actually benefiting from it. It encourages our souls. I think it helps and equips local churches, which is what we're about. We want small local churches to be equipped to do things that God's called them to do, and so that's a huge benefit. It's super encouraging for us to see that happening too.
Yeah, I think something that I loved about just the collaboration of everyone is having different perspectives in terms of ministry. Some are pastors, some are not. Some have been serving in ministry, whether globally or locally here in West Virginia or, in other small places for decades. Some have been in ministry for 5 to 8 years. We have all these different perspectives and ways to kind of bring their expertise in, their wisdom in, some lessons learned in, and then also just really be a beacon of encouragement for folks who are maybe experiencing things that we've experienced or will experience things that we've experienced in small towns and rural places, because it can often feel isolating, especially serving in ministry and churches. When you see a broad scale of like things that are happening, resources that are being put out there. We've talked about this before, and I think when I was on the show before, we even talked about this, Philip, about how it's often difficult to, the resources that are available are hard to translate sometimes for smaller towns or smaller churches.
Sure.
And so it was important for us, and it's continued to be important for us in all that we've done with Rural Church Voices, is to make everything very accessible, very affordable, short and compact to read, so Church Out Here, I think, is our longest book because we had, such great content from everyone. But
again, I'll say, bless you guys. We always like to shout it out on the show. Under 200 pages. You have 12 chapters and it's under 200 pages. Like that. Yeah. If things were more normal, I would have read this whole thing. Like that's a great length.
Yeah, but that's important to us too, because we know, how hard it is to sit down and read a book for anyone. Like everyone's busy, whether you have kids or not, job or not, whatever it is. So we want to offer resources that are accessible and easy for people to engage with.
So as far as the editing structure, I'm curious because it went Jason, Olivia, Will. You guys are the second quarter of the book, and your 3 chapters are right next to each other. Was that part of the plan, or did it just kind of go that way with the topics you guys divvy out amongst yourselves? How did that?
So I don't think we planned it that way for us to be together. I think it was more kind of naturally arose out of the topics that we chose. But there was a real sense of certain chapters were more focused on the church, and then other chapters were more outward focused in the sense of mission and the church going out. But as far as us being together, I think it was just providence.
Okay, no, I was just wondering about that because it's like 1, 2, and 3 were other people, and then you guys are 4, 5, and 6, and then that's halfway through the book. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if that was part of the plan. Like Will's chapter finishes and it's halfway through, and I was like,
that's like when you read the Bible and you end up like getting sucked into numerology, and but there's not actually anything there. Right?
My God, I have had a number of conversations with people lately about just seeing numbers, and I'm like, guys, like, and if you are looking for it, you'll find it, and you can make yourself crazy or trick yourself into believing all sorts of stuff. But yeah, that's an interesting phenomenon.
Yeah, the whole outline was purely topical though, and then we just looked at what authors were best equipped to speak on the topics we wanted to deal with.
Okay. Well, I don't want to necessarily go fully through each one, but I can hit them quickly here. And when I say quick, don't feel like you need to rush. Jason, I thought your topic was really interesting, talking about caring for dying churches. And that's not, I mean, that's something I think about occasionally, but I have to imagine if one's primary environment is rural church ministry, that's got to be a real reality to think about. That people in the communities, like you said, if you got 1,000 people in a given community, like I'm sure there aren't as many churches as there are like in a big city. So tell me about that ministry of your personal experience and kind of how you approach that.
Yeah, so I've spent a lot of time in ministry, but also just in my Christian life around churches that are declining and dying. And the reason why the topic I felt was very important for me is, it's very important that we think through and there be a robust ministry and focus on church planting. That's obviously focused on the book. Jim Drake was our expert on that, and he had the chapter directly before mine on church revitalization. But I also deeply believe that there needs to be an intentional focus and ministry and an intentional care for dying churches and the people that are within those churches, because there are so many churches in rural communities. This is not just a rural community problem. They're declining and dying, and oftentimes the care for the people is not the primary focus. It's more on what's going to happen to the building. How does this fit within the organization? And I think there's a real need and an opportunity for pastoral care. I was an interim pastor, but in a lot of ways, I've thought of myself as being a hospice pastor to a congregation that closed their doors in 2014. And during that time also, and I mentioned this in the beginning of the chapter, I was able to compare that to another congregation within my old denomination that was also dying, and to see the difference between an intentional, careful hospice approach with one congregation versus another congregation that didn't have that kind of pastoral care really opened my eyes to the need to care for those people. And I just really think that the church as a whole would benefit if we had that conversation. And it's not easy to have because we don't want to talk about, it can feel uncomfortable to talk about, dying churches and facing the prospect that a church may close. But I think it's better to finish well than to be in denial.
So for listeners whose primary environment is not a rural church and who may not have had any experience with it, what happens when a church dies?
So at the very basic level, I would say that the church ceases to meet regularly to perform the functions of a church. That on a very basic level. There are other ancillary things to talk about, the future of the property, the assets of the church. But the most important question is what's going to happen to the people that are there. Very
it's
rare.
Like do new churches start up or do they get absorbed? Are there other churches they go to?
So there are different pathways. One really exciting ministry is church replanting, and I'm not an expert on that, so I wouldn't speak too much to it. But that is where a church that is near the end is intentionally replanted, and whether that is they consolidate with another church, whether the church closes down and reopens as a church plant, as I understand it, it can look different ways, and those are essential ministries. I think, but the niche that I really wanted to speak to was an intentional focus on pastoral care for the dying church as it's in the last months and days of its life.
Because, I mean, that's got to be, again, not to bang the drum on that too hard, but rural church, like if you're in a small town, these are people, like if you are of any sort of like seniority at all, like if you've been there for a couple decades, like you have a lot of history there. Like you've bared each other's burdens. There have been births, there have been baptisms, there have been weddings, there have been deaths. Like that's a whole lot. That's a lot of community investment and emotional attachment to be like, okay, this thing is now done, even if it's replanted or a lot of the people all figure out something else together. Like that is a bit of a lamentable situation. And like I said, even if that's the right path forward, like that's got to be quite a bit to go through.
Absolutely. What you just said in my chapter, I think that's so important. I think that if we're not careful, especially among leaders, that reality can get lost in bigger strategic pictures, in conversation about, things like the assets in the building. The real experience of the people in the church can be lost. And that's also why I tried to draw a parallel between the experience and the end of the life of the local church versus hospice care for individuals. And I know that most people that are pastors or leaders are familiar, walk through members of their church or family members, through this process at the end of life. And I think there are a lot of parallels with the grieving and the lamenting, but also the celebrating of life. But tackling questions at end of life, and there were some parallels there that I really wanted to explore, again with the goal being that real intentional pastoral care for the members in a church that's dying.
Olivia, your chapter after Jason's, you covered a topic that we just recently covered on our most recent topic toss-up, discipleship. That's something that we have here at the Substance previously, and something that is very important to me, was very formative for me. And I thought it was really interesting how you kind of talked about your personal experience with that as a concept, and kind of how you were introduced to it, and just talk a little bit about your experience, and then what you wanted to communicate to folks in rural churches with your work here.
Yeah, I think so. Growing up in church, I don't have a lot of memories of being a person who wasn't in church. As a kid, it was just part of life. And then growing into adulthood, it's something that, by the grace of God, I've chosen for myself as well, to continue to be a part of. And so I'm really thankful for my upbringing and just having an understanding of God as a child. I can see how important and formative those years were for me. But when I look back on the church that I grew up in, and I love them dearly, they cared for me so well. The way that they discipled me is different than the way that I'm discipled in our church today, or even the way that our children are discipled in our churches today. So I think that now we have a bit of a more intentional approach to discipleship. So meaning we understand what it means to disciple our kids, to disciple those around us, to ensure that we're being discipled ourselves. And I say we, but I really mean me. As I wrote this, I was writing this from a very personal experience, but also seeing just the landscape of a lot of our churches, especially in small towns. We may not have a really intentional mindset in terms of discipleship. It could just be, we care for people because we're family and we love one another, and we have a Bible study reserved for a Sunday morning or a Wednesday night. And then we'll do things here and there, but it's often either program based or just non-existent. And so what I would love to see in all churches, but particularly smaller churches in rural places, is really this intentionality towards discipleship, learning the Word of God for ourselves, particularly for women. That was a big portion of my chapter as well, that I wanted to ensure was written and talked about in the book, because it's often lacking in small places as well. So I think having this real understanding of what does it mean to make disciples, how is that present in every day of our lives, rather than just, present in churches and in the four walls of our churches and programs and things. And so I feel like I had a unique perspective, being someone who grew up in rural West Virginia, who grew up in the church, who had a good experience growing up in church. I'm thankful for that as well, that in my formative years of growing up among other believers, that they cared for me and they looked out for me. But I also want to see how can we build on that and make that something, somewhat of a legacy that we can leave our children, that they can leave their children, and so on.
And I would imagine, I mean, not to be overly simplistic, but some of the benefits that a few different authors talked about, some of the unique benefits of being in a rural church environment, in my mind, I would imagine that would really kind of cater towards, if folks caught a vision and they were willing and interested and committed, for some deeply rich discipleship relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, in our church in particular, of 200 or so, it can feel large to us sometimes, especially when we're all together.
Sure.
And I think no matter what, size of the church, there's going to be an overwhelm in terms of caring for people, in terms of discipleship, in terms of evangelism, in terms of mission, all of these things, no matter the size of your church, whether you're large, or there's 30 people in your congregation, there's always going to be a bit of an overwhelm. And so I think, especially for those of us in smaller places, in rural places, seeing that that's okay, but also seeing that it's not an excuse to not do things, to not pursue deep discipleship, to not pursue mission in our communities in a way that affects those around us, physically those around us who we most likely know.
Sure.
Most of us all know our neighbors. We either see them, on a day-to-day basis. We grew up with them. We know them from somebody. So it's harder to ignore people. And I think Will could probably speak to that as well. Will doesn't like to ignore people. I'm more of a, if I see you at the grocery store and I know you, I'm more likely to just turn the other way. If Will sees you at the grocery store, even if he doesn't know you, I feel like he's going to go talk to someone. So we might have.
I mean, how many in a town that small? How many people do you really not know at all?
I know everybody. I might not remember their name, but I've seen them somewhere.
I love
There's
it.
something we can talk about.
That kind of goes into what you wrote, which is another very favorite topic of mine that we've talked about here loads on the show. Just the idea of community, right? The church as the true body and the family of God in this earth, trying to live a kingdom life. Tell me a little bit about your passion there, what you wanted to communicate, and really encouragements to folks. I mean, primarily in rural churches, but folks in local churches trying to make their communities more Godward places of encouragement for folks. What would you say?
Yeah, our churches looking like heaven are extremely important. And so what that looks like is fostering biblical community within our churches and allowing it to be seen externally. I think post-pandemic, something has happened in probably the world. From our context in the United States, there's definitely a polarization of culture here. And
Sure.
People are beginning to look at the church increasingly either as favorable if they are religious, or hateful bigots if they're not. And I think if we're going to win people to Christ, they're going to have to see the benefits of heaven on earth. And so I really just spent the chapter unpacking what we call the Lord's Prayer, as Jesus prays, your kingdom come and your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. I believe that he's praying in the kingdom of the church. I believe the kingdom of Jesus is the church on earth. And so I think when he says, give us this day our daily bread, there's an expectation that the church practically and in a very real sense provides and cares for one another. So in a small town context, in a rural context specifically, there's a lot of poverty. Our church gets tons of benevolence requests and requests for financial assistance. And so we had to really kind of come up with a good biblical strategy for how to deal with poverty and how to help people in our churches. And so I wrote a little bit about the church in Jerusalem in the first century and how there was not a needy person among them. Well, what does that look like, right?
Sure.
And I think sometimes we forget that the church is supposed to, in a very real way, care for one another. And what tends to happen is when culture puts pressure on the church, we just answer culture. And so that turns us into humanitarians rather than gospel preachers. And so we begin to just do good works, or we don't do them at all. But our good works sometimes can tend to be externally focused instead of beckoning people, hey, join God's family and your needs will be met and you will be taken care of, because this community looks like the kingdom of heaven.
And another thing I particularly appreciated in your chapter was the delineation between, you talked about making things look like heaven on earth, the differentiation between trying to force the broader culture as a whole into that image versus our religious assemblies, like our church communities mirroring heaven rather than trying to be some sort of culture warrior.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think, I'm a church planter, so I spend a lot of time with other church planters, and I've gotten to the point where I kind of roll my eyes when church planters are like, "We're going to make our city, great again," or that's probably what Donald Trump says, but whatever. Like the goal of a church plant is to make the city awesome, right? It's like, no, that's not the Great Commission. That's not your purpose. And so, yeah, if Milton, West Virginia is a little bit better place to live because our church exists there, then praise God. But that's not our mission. That's missional drift if that's what we think we're supposed to be doing.
Well, and that also kind of like, I don't know if that's pride or if that's kind of a misunderstanding or what, but the idea is that like the church is supposed to be the city on the hill and salt and light. And if we're trying to like, the idea isn't like we are trying to by force or by laws or by coercion, like make people more moral or more spiritual. Like that's not something we can do. Like, I mean, I'm sure everybody's theology may be a little bit different, but Bible's pretty clear that like that is given to us as a gift.
Yeah.
That's not something that we have created in and of ourselves, and nor can we especially like foist it on a secular culture.
Right. And so it shouldn't be seen when someone moves to a city where there's a really cool church. It should be seen when someone joins a godly local church. It should be seen that people care for one another. They provide financially and practically for one another. They forgive one another. Racism goes away. Orphans and kids are fostered and adopted and cared for. All of these practical needs are met because it looks like the kingdom of heaven.
Thought I'd kind of open it generally. Like we don't have a ton of time left, but are there any little nuggets or chapters in particular, any surprises or things that you thought was particularly that ministered to you guys as editors as you were kind of shaping it? Did anybody's piece, and I'm sure that not to neglect the others, but what stood out to you? What ministered to you guys as you were kind of shaping this as a resource for other rural churches?
I think one that stood out to me was Chris Priestley's chapter called Hold Fast and Outlast. I forget what number he is.
Number
but
9.
And it was 8 or 9. So he wrote beautifully about the intersection of really culture, societal issues, and how the church, particularly a small town church, can respond or even should respond from a biblical perspective, from a practical perspective, from just a caring perspective. When he sent his submission in, I think we all read his and we were like, yes, this is wonderful. I think that he beautifully wrote to that with humility and grace, but also with a lot of biblical truth. And just his writing and section in that portion of the book really ministered to me and helped me. I read it and it was practically helpful for me as a mom, as someone who works in ministry. So yeah, I really loved that portion of the book.
Will, Jason, anything stand out to you?
Yeah, I'll say that a chapter, and I probably was very drawn to it just because it was so connected to the topic that I was exploring, was Jim Drake's chapter on revitalization was obviously a good fit in connection with the chapter on a hospice ministry for dying churches. And just to kind of see him explore the subject of revitalization. He has experience in that area, both as a church revitalizer, but he was also somebody that was a catalyst and helped other churches through the revitalization process. It was important to me as I was considering how to minister to dying churches to make sure that what I was saying fit well within the framework of church revitalization, because, that's what we want. And so just to read and see his insights on that and compare that with what I was writing was particularly meaningful for me.
Well, I'm excited to check those out. Will, do you have anything?
Yeah, I already told you I love Christians, the first chapter and the introduction. He did a great job. I like the way he writes.
Did he also do that introduction? That was good.
Yeah, he should write fiction also. Like, he should just write a lot of different things. His writing style is really cool. And then I personally benefited. Again, the timing was providential, I think. But I was preaching through the book of Ephesians at New Heights Church. And as I was editing and reading Justin Honaker's chapter on spiritual warfare, and he used a lot from Ephesians chapter 6 and the armor of God. And so I actually was quoting his chapter in my sermons before it was published. And so it was just practically helpful for me.
Very nice. Well, excellent. So one of the traditions we have here on the show is we do a little segment called Substance Shoutouts. I know we got 3 of you guys on here. Is there anything that you guys want to highlight for the audience? So Substance Shoutouts are things that you guys have been watching, reading, listening to, engaging with that's either been edifying or enjoyable. It doesn't have to be super spiritual, but what has been enriching your life?
All right, I'll go first.
Excellent.
I think one thing that is spiritual that's been encouraging lately is I'll give a shout out to Ronnie Martin and Donnie Griggs. They just released a book like weeks before we released ours called Pastoring Small Towns. And we didn't know they were working on it. They didn't know we were working on one. And so the books are very similar. Ours is probably more pragmatic. Theirs really speaks to the heart for pastors specifically. And so Jason and Olivia not being in pastoral ministry maybe wouldn't benefit as much, but as I read it, I was encouraged. They were gracious enough to send me an early copy, and I read it, and I was just really impacted, encouraged to not give up, which I think when we were working on this book, I think they Jason and Olivia distracted me to the point that I thought about giving up on ministry a couple times, but it was just super encouraging, and I thought it was providential and funny that we were releasing books, for similar audiences at the same time. And,
what's the name of that again?
Pastoring Small Towns.
Is that the Ronnie Martin who's the musician and on the Happy Rant, or is that a different Ronnie Martin?
That's the same guy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where is he out of?
He's in. Is it called Athens, Ohio?
Okay.
His church is called Substance.
Yes, it is. I saw that. I've talked to him online. I was thinking about reaching out to have him for the music. I really appreciated his last couple of projects.
Yeah, you should. And Donnie's in Moorhead, North Carolina, over on the coast.
Olivia, you got a shout out or shout out?
Yeah, so I this year have told myself I need to start reading more fiction. Jason has actually encouraged me to do this because he's a big fiction reader. So I have been reading this series of books called the Thursday Murder Club. I don't know if anyone's familiar, but it has brought me so much joy.
That sounds so deeply non-Christian and not joyful.
Okay, well, they're really funny. So the Thursday Murder Club is these 4 elderly friends who they live in the same old folks home, as we would say here in West Virginia. But it's really funny. So it's not like a murder mystery. It's mystery. It keeps you on your toes. But it's just a really good story. The author is a great writer. I've read 3 of his books this year already, and I'm waiting for the 4th one to come out. Yeah, they're that good. I've flown through them. They're easy to get from the library. Highly recommend if you like a good, fun, easy fiction read. I'm not a heavy book reader. I don't like to watch heavy movies. I leave that to my husband, who will watch them after I go to bed. But this book
about murder, surprisingly. It was really funny.
Sounds like fun. Jason, anything you'd like to shout out? Reading, watching, listening to? What's been bringing you joy or encouraging you lately?
Absolutely. So I had this great answer based upon how much I love fiction and recommend it to my friends. But since Olivia went that direction, I'll go a little bit of a different direction. So I kind of have eclectic taste. Like I said, I'm very interested in fiction. It's actually what I hope to write next, and but that's still to be determined. But I've also really been into poetry lately. So I've been reading a lot of poetry and trying to write a little bit of poetry for myself. And it's really been stretching my, what I think are my abilities, but also it seems to minister to me and kind of edify me in a different way than maybe even nonfiction or fiction. So I've been kind of searching out. I've been reading some of the classic poems, but I've also been kind of searching out authors or people that I'm familiar with to see if they had written any poetry. So one example, and I'm working my way through it, and it may be above my pay grade, but Eugene Peterson released a book of poetry several years ago. So I've been working through that and really just kind of taking in poetry.
Very nice. I've heard a number of people share about that. Nobody's said, I don't know if I give off that vibe like, hey, Philip, you need to read this. But I've seen a number of people talk about that lately, and it does, if somebody's in the mood or of the persuasion, that seems like a very great resource. Excellent. Well, I appreciate your guys all joining us tonight. It's sometimes interesting when you have multiple people, but it was nice that we were able to have a nice, nobody's talking over each other too much here. All right, folks, we can start with, I got on my screen, I got Will, Olivia, Jason. Where would you like us to send folks? Do you guys have your own feeds, just Rural Church Voices? Where can folks follow you guys if they're interested in checking out your work and finding more?
Well, they can find us on Twitter and Facebook at Church Rural, and we can connect with you guys there, and lots of links on those pages for you to find the books, order them as well. Easiest place is probably go to Amazon, find them there, and you can find the books available for purchase and more information about what we do on our website at ruralchurchvoices.com.
Appreciate you guys joining us tonight, and we'll catch you guys later. All right, everybody. So that was Olivia Meade, Will Basham, and Jason Cook of the Rural Church Voices Network on their book Church Out Here, Insights from Small Town Churches. Yeah, I really appreciated their passion for the church. I'm excited to have you guys check this out. So yeah, check the links in the show notes to pick up Church Out Here, and I'll also have links for Olivia and Jason and Will's previous books in the line as well. It's good stuff. It's good. I'm not in a rural context. I was edified. So whether you're in a rural church, large church, something in between, it's really good content about how to live healthfully in a church, whether you are a pastor or you are just a member seeking to be active and love your fellow congregants. This is really good stuff. So I'll throw the links in the show notes there. So yeah, I guess I'm doing the whole plug section at the end here solo. So follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. We are at The Substance Pod on the social medias. Thank you to Trevor Aiken and Vincent Edwards for our intro music. Thank you to Anna Marinello and Vincent Edwards for our art. And thank you to Dave Hallahan for our editing. You can reach us at thesubstancepod@gmail.com with any feedback, future guest suggestions, and if you want to get books you want us to talk about, movies you want us to consider adding to our substantive cinema list, you can do that at thesubstancepod.com or leave us a voicemail. Our number is 913-703-3883. Or if you want to send us a clearer, you can just send a voice note to the email address there. If the show is something you enjoy, you care about, you want to support, Two ways to do that. Join us in the show notes. You can sign up at $5 or $10 a month on the Anchor link. And I guess now that's the Spotify for podcasters link. You can do that at $5 or $10 a month. Hopefully soon here. Promise you we are working on some actual ideas and incentives there. But for now, everything is free. There's not going to be anything behind a paywall. But if the substance is something that brings you benefit and regular support is something you're able to do, we invite you to join there. Consider that. Or if you want to send us a couple bucks, but monthly support is not your thing, you can do that on Cash App at $thesubstancepod. And I will say I just sent out both Trevor and Vincent's thank you gift. So anybody who sent us some cash for that, I appreciate that, and I will send that out as well. And still feel free. Dave, like I said, is editing the show. If you have any messages or thank yous or things like that you want to send for Trevor and Vincent, still feel free to send those in, and we'll maybe make a compilation and in an episode or two throw any of those extra up if you guys would like. So thanks for joining us. Hope that was enjoyable. Hope you all were encouraged, and we'll see you next time on The Substance. Oh, wait, how do I end the show on my own?